My name's David, I'm 46 years old, and I live in Rockford, Illinois. If you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have told you I was finally turning things around. After a lifetime of being the invisible one in the family, the one who got the "can you help with this" calls, but never the "how are you." Once, I'd scraped together enough to buy my own home. Nothing fancy, just a modest 3-bedroom on the outskirts of town, but it was mine. Mine. Every creak of the floorboards, every scratch on the door frame, it all belonged to me. And I guarded that key like it was sacred. My sister, Rachel, though, she was the golden child. Always had been. When we were growing up, she'd break curfew, get caught with a bad report card, even total Dad's Buick one summer. And every time, she got a gentle lecture and a hug. Me? If I so much as forgot to take out the trash, it was a full-blown disappointment speech. She had charm, I'll give her that. The kind of charm that made people overlook the wreckage she left behind. When I bought the house, I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents. I wanted something that was just for me, for once. I didn't need their opinions or their expectations creeping in. I wanted quiet. I wanted a chance to breathe without feeling like someone else's backup plan. But Rachel found out. I don't know how. Maybe from one of Mom's gossip sessions, or maybe she'd been snooping on Facebook when I posted a single blurry photo of the backyard. However she found out, she showed up one afternoon with that smile she always used when she wanted something. I knew that smile. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile that meant, "This is mine now, you just don't know it yet." She walked right past me that day like she already owned the place, carrying 2 big tote bags and calling over her shoulder, "Just stopping by to check it out." I stood there in the doorway, stunned, watching as she set the bags down in the living room and started opening kitchen cabinets like she was on a tour. But it wasn't a tour. It wasn't curiosity. It was assessment. Inventory. That night, I found out she'd posted photos online. Pictures of my house with captions like, "Our new family hub," and "Can't wait for everyone to make memories here." Everyone. I felt the first tremor of dread in my chest. But I told myself I was overreacting. She was just excited. She didn't mean it literally. A week later, I came home from work and saw a tricycle in the yard. Rachel's youngest, Max, had left it there. Then I noticed the sidewalk chalk drawings all over the driveway. Inside, I found juice boxes in the fridge and a stack of coloring books on my kitchen table. My stomach sank. When I called Rachel, she laughed it off. "Oh, we just stopped by? Hope you don't mind. We're treating it like a second home. The kids love it there." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because deep down, I already knew. She wasn't asking permission. She decided this was hers. And my silence was the only yes she needed. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but Rachel didn't stop there. The next week, I pulled into the driveway to find her car parked right in my spot. Not even on the street. In the driveway, blocking my usual space like she'd been living there for years. And through the front window, I could see her oldest, Madison, stretched out on my couch, scrolling on her phone, shoes kicked off, socks up on the cushions. I sat in the car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. A part of me wanted to just back out and drive somewhere, anywhere else. But it was my house. I'd worked 2 jobs for years to save up for that down payment. I wasn't about to be a guest in my own home. I went inside. Rachel looked up from the kitchen island where she was stirring something in a pot. "Oh hey, you're home early." Like I was the intruder. There were grocery bags on the counters, half unpacked. Toys scattered across the floor. A load of laundry running in the washer. I asked what she was doing here. She gave me that same breezy, dismissive smile. "Just figured it'd be easier if we stayed here this week. The apartment's getting fumigated, and you've got all this space. Hope you don't mind." Mind. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She hadn't even called. Hadn't even texted. Just moved in. That night, I lay awake in my own bed, listening to the sounds of her family in the next room. Max crying because he didn't want to sleep alone. Madison arguing with Rachel over the Wi-Fi password. Rachel's voice laughing too loudly on the phone with someone. My home, my sanctuary, had been swallowed whole by them. And every time I tried to speak up, she'd brush it off. "We'll be out in a few days. It's just temporary. Don't be so uptight." But the days stretched into a week. Then another. Little things started disappearing. A bottle of scotch I'd been saving for years. My favorite mug. The good towels. And in their place, piles of shoes by the door. A sticky handprint on the TV screen. Crumbs in the couch cushions. I started coming home later, just to avoid them. Started sleeping with earplugs to block out the noise. I'd wake up and wonder how it had gotten to this point. How I'd lost control of something I'd worked so hard to build. But the worst came the day I found the spare key missing. I'd hidden it under a loose brick in the backyard. Not even Rachel knew about it. Or so I thought. But one afternoon, I went out back to check, and the brick had been shifted. The key was gone. And that's when it hit me. They weren't planning on leaving. They were settling in. The next morning, I left for work early. Too early. I sat in the parking lot of the office for an hour before the building even opened, just staring at the steering wheel, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do. I felt like I was drowning in my own life. And every time I came up for air, Rachel was standing there, pushing me back under with a smile. That evening, when I pulled into the driveway, her car wasn't there. For a fleeting second, I let myself hope. Maybe they'd left. Maybe they'd finally gone back to their apartment. But when I stepped inside, hope evaporated. There were moving boxes stacked by the door. A suitcase sat by the stairs. On the dining table, a piece of paper, a printed-out lease agreement with my name, her name, both our names, typed at the top. I picked it up with shaking hands. It wasn't official. It wasn't notarized. It was one of those free templates you can download online. But the fact she'd printed it at all made something in my chest twist. I turned around and saw her standing in the hallway, arms crossed, a triumphant little tilt to her head. "Figured it's time we made this official," she said casually. "You've got more room than you need, and it just makes sense. I mean, families should stick together, right?" I don't remember what I said in response. Maybe nothing. Maybe some horse attempt at a protest. But she brushed it off like she always did. Later that night, I sat in the dark at the kitchen table, staring at that fake lease. Rachel had gone to bed hours ago, after telling me she was using the master bedroom, just for now, because it had better light in the mornings. Madison had taken over the guest room. Max was sleeping on the couch. And me? I didn't know where I belonged anymore. My phone buzzed, a text from my mom. "Heard Rachel's staying with you. So glad you're helping her out. It's what family does. We're proud of you." Proud of me. The words felt like a slap. No one had been proud when I worked overtime shifts to save for the down payment. No one had been proud when I spent weekends scraping paint and patching drywall, alone, sweating, exhausted. But now that Rachel had invited herself into my life, into my home, I was finally the good son. I turned the phone face down and stared out into the dark. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just done. And that was the moment the idea took root. Small at first. Quiet. But solid. I was going to take it back. All of it. The next few days, I watched. I didn't argue. I didn't push back. I just watched. And the more I watched, the clearer it became. Rachel wasn't just staying for a few days. She was nesting. She had forwarded her mail to my address. I found envelopes with her name in the mailbox. She'd changed the Wi-Fi name to Rachel's Place. She'd started leaving shoes at every door, leaving her curling iron plugged in on my bathroom counter. I opened the fridge one morning to find her kale smoothies, protein bars, and almond milk taking up every shelf. My sandwich fixings were shoved into a crisper drawer. And then there were the little decorations. Framed photos of her family on my mantel. A little sign above the stove that said, "Live, Laugh, Love." A basket of pastel dish towels where my plain white ones used to be. It was like I was slowly being erased. But what pushed me over the edge wasn't the photos, or the Wi-Fi name, or even the creeping takeover of every corner of my house. It was what I overheard. I'd stayed late at work one evening, trying to avoid them. When I finally got home, I stood outside for a moment, exhausted, listening. I could hear Rachel inside, talking on the phone. "Yeah, no, it's perfect," she was saying, voice bright, excited. "He's so passive, he won't say no. Honestly, it's like he's grateful to have us here. And once we've been here long enough, I'll look into getting the deed changed. You know, something official. Family entitlement or whatever. He won't fight it. He never does." I stood there, frozen. I wasn't passive. I wasn't grateful. I wasn't going to let her take everything. The next morning, I took the day off work. I called a locksmith and had every lock changed. Front door, back door, garage, even the basement door. Then I called the police. Not 911, but the non-emergency line. I explained the situation, calmly, carefully, that my sister had entered my home without permission, that she'd refused to leave, that she had taken a spare key without my knowledge. The officer on the line was polite but firm. "If she's refusing to leave, and you're the sole owner of the property, you're within your rights to have her removed." I exhaled, a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Would you like us to send someone out?" I thought of Rachel's voice on the phone the night before. "He won't fight it." "Yes," I said quietly. "Please." When the officers arrived, Rachel wasn't even surprised. That was the part that stung the most. She looked at them standing on the porch, hands on their belts, radios crackling, and she let out this little sigh, like she'd been expecting it all along. "Oh, David," she said, stepping into the doorway with that tired, patronizing smile. "This is really unnecessary. You didn't have to call the police on your own sister." One of the officers spoke gently but firmly. "Ma'am, your brother is the sole owner of this residence. He's asked you to leave. You need to gather your things." Rachel rolled her eyes, turned back into the house, and called over her shoulder, "Kids, pack up. Looks like Uncle David's having a bad day." No apology, no remorse, just annoyance. As she passed by me with a suitcase, she paused long enough to whisper under her breath, "You'll regret this." Then she walked right out, Max trailing after her in tears, Madison glaring at me like I'd ruined Christmas. I stood there, heart pounding, watching them load up their car. The officers waited until they drove off, then handed me a card. "If she tries to come back, call us again. And you might want to look into a formal trespass notice." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. My house was quiet again. I should have been celebrating. But instead, I wandered from room to room like a stranger. Everywhere I looked, there were traces of them. A juice stain on the carpet, stickers on the bathroom mirror, a half-empty cereal box in the pantry, and under it all, a gnawing fear. What if she really tries to come back? That night, I double-checked every lock, closed every window, drew every curtain. I slept with the porch light on. I told myself it was over, that she'd move on, that she'd find someone else to leech off of. But 2 days later, I got a call from my mom. "David," she said, her voice tight, "why did you throw your sister and her children out onto the street?" I closed my eyes. Of course Rachel had spun the story. Of course I was the villain again. "She wasn't on the street," I said quietly. "She has an apartment. She was squatting in my house." Mom sighed. "I don't want to get in the middle of it. But she's very upset. Maybe you could just let her stay until she gets back on her feet." I felt something harden in my chest. "Mom," I said, voice calm but cold, "she's never been on her feet." After that call with Mom, I sat in silence for a long time. The house felt heavy, like the walls were leaning in, waiting to crush me. I realized then that Rachel hadn't just occupied my home. She'd infected every part of my life. Even with the locks changed, even with her physically gone, she'd planted herself in the very narrative of who I was to the family. And they believed her. Of course they did. She'd always been the favorite, the golden child, the one who could make a mess and call it a blessing. The next morning, I woke up to messages. First from Aunt Lynn, heard about what happened. Try to be more understanding. Family's family. Then from my cousin Greg. Wow, dude. Kicking out a single mom? Harsh. The kicker came from Dad. Call me. I didn't. I couldn't. I'd spent my entire life bending to their expectations, swallowing their disappointment, their subtle jabs, their favoritism. But this time, the silence felt better than defending myself to ears that never listened. That night, I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone, exhausted in a way no sleep could fix. I came across Rachel's latest Facebook post. A photo of her and the kids standing in front of her car, parked outside some motel. Sometimes life knocks you down, but we keep smiling, thankful for the blessings we have. And in the comments, "So sorry you're going through this. David should be ashamed. You're stronger than he'll ever be." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My chest felt hollow. I could have left it alone. Could have let the story stand. Let them believe whatever made them feel righteous. But something inside me rebelled. For once in my life, I didn't want to be the quiet one. I didn't want to be the fool in the background of Rachel's narrative. So I opened the app, scrolled to the comments, and typed, "Rachel, you were not evicted. You broke into my home using a stolen key, refused to leave, and I had to call the police after weeks of trespassing. Please stop lying." I hit send before I could second-guess it. Within minutes, notifications flooded in. Comments piling up. Private messages. Accusations. Defenses. Rachel's profile went silent. I stared at the screen, heart thudding, a strange quiet settling over me. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not victorious. Not vindicated. Just free. And in that stillness, I realized. Sometimes you have to burn the bridge to stop them from crossing it again. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls. 3 from my mom. 2 from Dad. A dozen from Rachel. The last voicemail she left was just her breathing, shallow and fast, then a muttered, "Unbelievable," before she hung up. I didn't call back. I didn't even listen to the earlier voicemails. I knew exactly what they'd say. I'd spent my whole life hearing those scripts. The guilt. The twisting of facts. The plea to keep the family together. But the bridge was already ash. Later that day, a knock at the door jolted me. For a second, I wondered if she'd shown up again, bold as ever. But when I opened it, it was a man in a suit, holding a clipboard. "Mr. David Monroe?" I nodded. He handed me an envelope. "You've been served." I stood there, staring at the envelope as he walked away. Inside, a handwritten letter from Rachel's lawyer. Not even formal paperwork, just a bluff and legal stationery. It demanded immediate reconsideration of her living situation, claiming she had rights under family occupancy law, citing statutes that didn't apply. I read it twice, then set it down on the kitchen counter and laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not a victorious one, just tired amusement. She wasn't going to stop. She never had. I poured myself coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the window where sunlight streamed in. My house. My window. My peace. I picked up my phone and called the lawyer I'd quietly hired after the police visit. I told him about the letter. "Empty threat," he said calmly. "She has no claim. But document everything. Every message. Every attempt she makes to re-enter. We'll build a case for a restraining order if necessary." I hung up and exhaled. I didn't want it to come to this. But I knew now, she wasn't just entitled, she was determined. And I wasn't going back. That night, as the sun set, I sat outside on the porch with a blanket wrapped around me, listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood. For the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel heavy. It didn't feel invaded. It felt like mine again. And I thought about all the years I'd been the one holding things together. The one patching the leaks, paying the debts, smoothing the family cracks while Rachel played innocent. Maybe it was never my job to hold it all up. Maybe the weight wasn't mine to carry at all. The next few days were eerily quiet. No calls from Rachel. No texts. Her Facebook profile went private. My parents stopped reaching out. The silence wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet before a storm. I filled the time cleaning the house. I scrubbed the floors until my knees ached. Peeled the stickers off the bathroom mirror one by one. Washed every dish twice. Not because the mess was so bad, but because I needed to scrub her presence out of every corner. But no matter how many times I swept or wiped or dusted, I still caught her scent in the air. Still saw flashes of her kids' fingerprints on the window. Still heard echoes of her voice when the house settled at night. It wasn't just my house she tried to take. It was my sense of belonging. A letter came in the mail that Thursday. I recognized the return address, the same law office that sent the bluff letter. But this time, it was official. A petition for establishing residency rights under a flimsy claim Rachel had filed, arguing she had been living here long enough to be considered a tenant. I sat on the porch steps holding the envelope, feeling a cold numbness settle over me. She wasn't just stubborn. She was relentless. I called my lawyer again. He wasn't surprised. "She's trying to force a legal gray area," he explained. "But the paper trail is in your favor. We have the police report. We have proof she never paid rent, never had permission. It won't hold up." I thanked him and hung up. But the relief never came. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about Rachel's last words before the police escorted her out. "You'll regret this." What she didn't understand was, I already had. I regretted every time I'd lent her money and never asked for it back. Every time I'd watched her talk over me at family dinners and let it slide. Every time I'd swallowed my frustration because she's going through a lot. And here we were. Rachel wasn't just the golden child. She was a parasite that had learned to wear a halo. And I'd spent years pretending not to notice the teeth underneath. I turned over, staring out the dark window, feeling the heaviness pressing down again. Tomorrow, we'd start the fight for real. But tonight, I let myself feel it. All of it. The betrayal. The grief. And the smallest flicker of resolve burning steady at the center of it all. I wasn't backing down. Not this time. The legal process wasn't quick. My lawyer had warned me it wouldn't be. Rachel filed motions, delays, more letters filled with half-truths and legal jargon she barely understood. Each one was like a stone hurled at my windows, not enough to break them, but enough to keep me on edge. I kept records. Every call. Every text. Every time she drove by the house and parked across the street like a vulture waiting for something to die. Weeks passed. Then a month. The court date was set. In the meantime, I saw less and less of my parents. They stopped calling altogether. It wasn't anger. It wasn't a fight. It was worse. Disappointment. Their golden child had finally been told no, and they couldn't reconcile that someone might deny her what she wanted. I'd hear from mutual relatives. "You should make peace. She's your sister. She's just going through a hard time." I didn't respond. I'd spent enough of my life trying to make peace with people who mistook my boundaries for cruelty. The night before the court hearing, I sat at the kitchen table with a copy of every document my lawyer had prepared. The evidence was clear. The facts were simple, but my hands still shook. Not because I doubted the outcome, but because I knew what I was about to burn down. This wasn't just about a house. This was about a family that had built itself around a lie. That Rachel was helpless. That Rachel was owed. That Rachel deserved more because she needed more. I wasn't just cutting her off. I was cutting through the story we'd all been forced to play along with. I barely slept. When I arrived at the courthouse the next morning, Rachel was already there, sitting with her lawyer on a bench, wearing a somber expression I'd never seen on her before. Like she'd finally realized she couldn't charm her way through this one. Her eyes met mine. There was no apology, just cold determination. And I realized she wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry it hadn't worked. As we were called into the courtroom, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into a room hoping to be understood. I was walking in knowing I was right. The hearing didn't last long. Rachel's lawyer tried to paint it as a misunderstanding, claimed she had implied consent to stay. But the judge wasn't buying it. The police report, the lack of any lease, the photos, the text messages, it was all there, clear as day. When the judge ruled in my favor, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. Like I'd been carrying this weight so long, I didn't know how to put it down. Rachel didn't look at me as we left the courtroom. She brushed past me without a word, her lawyer trailing behind, flipping through his folder as if searching for something that wasn't there. I watched her walk down the courthouse steps, head held high even as the verdict hung over her like a shadow. She never looked back. Not once. And in that moment, I realized she never would. I drove home in silence. The house was waiting for me. Still standing. Still mine. But as I walked from room to room, it felt different. Not because of what she'd left behind, but because of what I'd finally let go. I wasn't just reclaiming a house. I was reclaiming myself. That night, I stood on the porch, watching the lights flicker in the neighborhood. I thought about how easy it would be to fall back into old patterns, to answer the next call, to extend the next olive branch, to be the good one again. But I didn't want to be the good one anymore. I wanted to be whole. And maybe that meant being the villain in someone else's story. Maybe that meant losing the family that had never really seen me. Maybe that meant finally choosing myself. When I went back inside, I locked the door behind me, not out of fear, but out of resolve. And for the first time in years, the lock clicked into place not as a barrier, but as a promise. A promise that this was mine, that I belonged here, that I didn't owe anyone an open door. Not anymore.